Good morning, everybody. At least it's morning here in Korea. And welcome to The Varied Life. I'm Steve. And on this channel, The Varied Life, that you can find on YouTube, we're talking about hobbies. And the hobby project today is to go over an overview of resin printing and the slicer program that you need. There's a number of people that ask me about it and how I have made a number of prints. You can see this guy here. This is resin printed and then of course painted up, and you can do a lot of different things with resin printers. Here we have Deadpool, kind of hard to see, but yeah, the details are just insane. And you can do big prints, you can do small prints. We've got another small guy there. Let's see if we can get this to focus. But yeah, end up printing these guys out and painting them. And I've got some larger prints as well. So that's kind of the problem with resin printing, is you print a lot of stuff and you get behind on painting. So anyway, people asked me, besides having a resin printer and a wash and cure station, what is with this license slicer program that you need, and do you need it? And yes, you absolutely need a slicing program. Because basically what happens when you have a item that you want to print, it's in a digital file, in an STL file normally for resin printing. And then what that slicing program does is take the model and it slices it per layer. And in this case, it's 50 micron is the layer height. And so it'll slice that. And so it goes onto the build plate and goes into a vat of resin, UV light activated resin stuff, and then the light shines up through the bottom through a screen and an FEP or a film that allows the light to hit the resin, and once the liquid resin is exposed to those specific layers that have been made by the slicing program, that hardens, and then of course everything's upside down. And well, here, let me I know it's kind of hard to explain, so let's just kind of take a look and I'll show you a quick little video. This is how a resin printer works. This is a copy of Mad Jackalope, and I was trying to find a decent video or animation, and it's really hard because I haven't really seen any, but this one is probably, it's what I could find, so it kind of shows you what goes on. Basically what happens is we have a vat is filled with UV resin and the build plate is lowered down. Now we're talking about UV light is turned on at the bottom, and that shines up, and the resin is hardened, as you can see in this blue area. That would be one layer. So think of that as 50 microns. And then the vat goes, or the build plate goes down, it builds another layer and another layer until there's multiple layers. And then you take the print off of the bed and then you wash it either in IPA if you have normal resin, or you can use a water washable resin to clean off the print and to get all the cool little details like we showed you. And then, you put it under a UV light, and next thing you know, that's it. That's what you got going on for resin printing. And you can do some pretty amazing stuff. Here is a print that I'm doing that is, some kind of character. I thought it was kind of cool. I'm starting to paint this. So, yeah, you can do some massive prints. You can, it's pretty impressive. So you need a slicing program. So people have asked me, okay, I get that you need the printer and a wash and a cure station and some other stuff, but can you explain the slicer program that I use, which is Lychee Slicer Pro. Now, Lychee does have a free version, and then the pro version is a paid version. And there's also like other companies and programs like CheetahBox and other Tango Vox something or other. There are other companies out there that offer software slicer packages for free and or subscription paid service. I really get tired of the subscription service. I'm kind of old school. I'm going to be 58 this year, and when you buy something, it's yours. That's what I grew up with. And so this whole thing about, you got to do a subscription, I'm just really not digging that, unfortunately. So anyway, we're going to take a look at Lychee Slicer Pro and show you some of the details on it and just an overview. I'm going to try to condense this down, so we're going to go quickly through this overview. We're not going to go into a ton of detail, and maybe in future videos we'll get more into details on some of these things. So with that being said, boom, we have our Lychee Slicer Pro. And what we end up seeing here is our screen, and we got some interesting information just on the general layout. In the top left-hand corner, you have File. You can open up scenes or import 3D files or the STL files, stereolithographic something or other. I don't forget what it means, but it's the file that you're going to use that's going to get imported into this program so that you can make adjustments, add support, scale it up and down, move it on the build plate, print multiple items, eventually slice it, or the program will, and then you can transfer that sliced file onto a USB, or sometimes you can transfer it wirelessly to your printer and you can print your little item. So yeah, so you've got some things you can save if you're working on something and you have to go somewhere and work on it on a different time. You can save the scenes and so on and so forth. You have edit, so undo, redo, object, orientation, view. I always keep it on perspective because everybody else keeps it on perspective. You have some help. Great thing about Lychee is that it has some video tutorials that are really informative. And of course, with the advent of social media and YouTube and things like that, you will find a plethora of people who will explain pretty much anything and everything you want in regards to resin or FDM printing, among other things. So all this information here, basically all of these things here, I never use. The next area that we have up here is a 3D printer. So if we click on that, what you could end up doing is adding a 3D printer, and if you have multiple printers, you can do that. You also have resin settings. So there's different types of resins, and you'd have to dial that in for your specific machine because there's different variables with resins. Some are more liquidy, some are more reactive, some are brittle, some are not. So there's a whole deal that you have to do to dial in your specific resin for your machine. And just because I have the same resin as you do, you still might not have the same settings. So for example, check this out. These are some of the settings here. Yeah, that looks kind of ominous, doesn't it? But you can put in the brand, the name, and the great thing is that a lot of these companies will have default settings that will get you within the ballpark, and then you have to tweak it and do some test prints to really dial in the details on your prints. So I have like burn-in layers, number of layers, exposure time, lift, retraction speeds, weight before, after. I know it seems kind of intimidating, and it is, but really good companies, resin companies, will include the settings that they use and recommend, and then you just have to do some minor tweaks. So it will get you on the board. It won't be a home run every single time, but it'll get you on the board enough to where you can do some test prints and dial it in. Then you have your normal layers, the layer thickness, which is the detail that you want. This is 0.05, which is 50 microns. You could go down to 0.01 or 10 microns. The more detail, and like 10 microns, it's going to take a hell of a lot longer because that item that you're trying to print and is sliced at such a small slice of 10 microns versus 50 microns, it's going to add more time to your print. So if you want a lot of details, but you don't care that the print is going to take 10 or 11 or 15 hours or whatever, yeah, you can adjust it and get more details. But usually these things are set at 50 microns, and the details that I see on the prints that I get are fantastic. So it's not a big deal. I just leave it at that. You have exposure times, again, retraction, lift, and all that information. So yeah, you can pick and choose. So like say we wanted to add a printer. Now the great thing about Lychee Pro is that you can do a resin printer, and you can also do a filament printer. So if I want to do a resin printer, it could come up, and let's say I want to do, let's try Elegoo. So if I click on Elegoo, and it has all the different resin printers, and you could set that up, and there's mine, the Elegoo Saturn 3 Ultra. So you can have multiple printers set up with this program, and then you could transfer them wirelessly or via USB. So yeah, pretty good information here. And then the same thing, you could also add a filament printer. And I haven't used this because I don't have an FDM printer. But again, you could go through and, let's go back to Elegoo. You could set up and choose and set up different types of printers that way. So yeah, that's basically what you end up doing there. History, I've never clicked on this. This will be the first time that I clicked history. It just, okay. So it gives you an overview of the things that you have printed over time. And, I got a ton of pages, apparently. Yeah, a lot of different stuff. Test prints, the whole 9 yards. So you can go over the history of what you've printed. You can have a library, which has got some, basic shapes here. Like you have the test benchy, you could print that, or some different shapes. To help calibrate and dial in your printer with that resin or with the filament if you're doing an FDM print. Import, never use that, but I imagine, if you're going to open up a file, you could import some stuff into this program. Pretty much, once you set your resin and your printer, or your resin and your medium that you're going to be using, then that's all you're going to use. Now, what we end up having here is once we've selected our build plate, we see this kind of grayed out plate here, and that's a representation of the build area or the vat that my resin printer has. So in other words, if anything is outside the boundaries of that, we know that that won't print, and so that's too large of a print. So we can drag and drop files here. So for example, what we end up having is we've got some little figures here that I just ended up printing, and we'll just put 3 of these. We'll drag and drop into Lychee. So it'll take these STL files, it'll put them onto the center of the build plate, and we're going to end up moving them around. Now it's like, wait a second, here we have, I thought we had 3. Well, what it does is it imports all 3 of those files in the same place, and then you just have to move them. So you have some options here. You have objects. So in other words, if I want to see or not see, I could do it this way. If I don't want to see any of them, I could do that. Notice that there's a red asterisk, and some of these are in red. That indicates that there's something wrong with the model. So if we click on one of these, the cool thing about Lychee in the Pro version is it has this on this right-hand side that says Object Repair. So whoever made this model has holes in this that could affect it being printed with the resin printer. So we're just going to hit Repair 3D Model. It's going to run through, fill the holes, boom, it's good. And then what we can end up doing is go down here to, let's go to Arrange. Yeah, I don't want to do Arrange. Let's just go to Move. And we click on the blue part, and we can move it around the screen. So that's the first one. We'll click on the other one. We'll repair it as well. Again, for the most part, I'd say about 95% of the issues can be solved with this Repair the 3D Model. And that one actually turned out to be good. And there's the models that we have. You can, move around on the screen and get some very good views on this. And some of the details, just to show you how detailed this is. I mean, that's kind of crazy on what you end up seeing there. And these are like 32 millimeter or 35 millimeter little characters here. So, but you can get some pretty crazy details like we've had on some other things. So anyway, we got to repair that one too. So anyway, there's a lot of different options that you can do in moving figures around. You can arrange them all on the plate so that the computer will go through, or the software, and it will prearrange them onto the plate. Why it does it this way, I'm not really sure. I don't know. It's what it does what it thinks is best. But I never use that. You can lift it off the plate, and you can put it on the plate so the figures rest on the plate, but I leave it off the plate. You can go back to the original settings or center it back to the center of the build plate area. And with that on the plate, or what do we got here? Move, lift up. If we go on the right side of the screen, we see that we've got the object that we selected, moving it, center it on the platform, arrange, and then lift objects. So auto lift on import, we leave that on. That's a default setting, and the distance is set to 5 millimeters. Now this is the default, and I haven't seen anybody recommend anything less or more than this. So it seems to be a good rule of thumb for an industry standard orientation of your print on the build plate is 5 millimeters. So that will allow you to put some supports, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So you have those options there. The other thing that you have is rotate, and this little thing comes around, and if we click on one of these lines, we can rotate this model up, down, left, right, side to side. See how it highlights in yellow, and you can just move that to whatever position you want. Now, the reason that you would do this is that if you don't have a pre-supported file, which has supports reaching up and steadying this so it prints out well, you're going to have to orientate it and put it into a position so that you can add supports so it'll come out well. Now, again, you can go on YouTube and find a ton of videos on how to support items and figures, and it's a whole time-consuming thing. But anyway, you can rotate. You can put it on the plate, have some other things there. Or if you figured, hey, you screwed up enough, we're just going to reset and it'll go back to the original position. Now, the other thing we can do is scale this. So just because this item, which is, let me show you, this is kind of like one of the items here, right there. That's one of these figures. I mean, that's kind of a small little dude there, but I can scale them down to make them smaller, or I can scale it to a larger version. Now, I have taken some of these 32 millimeter figures from like Warhammer or Warhammer-esque, fighting soldier characters, D&D, whatever it is, and I can scale them up. So that's what scale could do. You've got some boxes where I could end up kind of doing this, kind of moving it, make it bigger, fatter, along the 3 axes, the X, Y, and Z. If I just grab the box in the middle, then I can do pretty much everything. It'll keep everything to scale. Let me see if I can get this back. So generally you want to keep everything scaled in a uniform scale, and we see this over on the right-hand side. We also see the X, Y, and Z, and that is measured in millimeters or inches to tell you how high this is. So like the Z, that's like from the bottom to the top is 2.12 inches. And then we have our scale of 100% of all those X, Y, and Z, and I could change it that way. So let's say I wanted to change this to 200%. And then bam, that what we ended up doing is just we just made this guy a hell of a lot bigger. So yeah, on the scale thing, it's pretty good. You can end up scaling and changing it as percentage, or again, you could go ahead and use that yellow box and make it bigger or smaller as needed. So yeah, it's a pretty handy little tool there. And then you have to reorientate and all that stuff. Now let's say I wanted to, let's go ahead and we'll pick this guy here. And if I wanted to get rid of him, I click, oh, come on now. Now it's not going to let me do it. If I wanted to get rid of him, it would right click. Seriously? Maybe it's under arrange. Maybe it's select. Seriously. I'm still new to all this, so let's just kind of play with this. Anyway, so let's say we move on, since I'm obviously still a noob on all this. We could copy one of these things. So let's say I wanted to copy this guy here. A little window comes up. I could make a copy, auto arrange, keep arrangement, but I just want to duplicate, and boom, what it ends up with is another figure that I could, move and do whatever I want with. But we're just going to undo that and just keep that as it is. We'll move this guy back down here. And you could mirror. So if you have something that is facing one direction, maybe you got a bookend and you got a character looking this way, but you also want the exact same thing but mirrored. So he's looking out this way. So you got matching bookends. You could do a mirror function. You could do some cuts on these. So in other words, if this is too big for your printer and you want it big, you can like cut it in half or on different, cut the arms off, and then you could reattach those later, as you could print each of those things separately, or you could basically cut them up and put all of those large pieces on the build plate, so that way you save a little bit of time. You could do that. Personally, I've never used that. And then the other thing we have is a measuring feature. So we've got this little guy here. Click, and we can go to the very top, and it will give you the measurements. We've got 97.03 millimeters. That might be important to know if you're building something or making some changes or you want something to fit. That's kind of way more advanced than what I'm doing, but that's what we got. As far as batch, I have no clue what the batch tool is, so I'm not even going to go into it. The other thing, we have this magic button. The magic button says if we want to auto-orientate, put in auto supports on or off, optimize supports, bracing supports, have a raft, and we have the choice of light supports or medium or heavy. Let's just kind of do light, and it says I'm feeling lucky. Here's the thing, and let's talk about this for a little bit. Resin printing has gotten a lot better, and so is FDM printing, where it's basically plug and play, but there's still a learning curve, and a lot of things that the software will do or try to do its best, but it's still not like a microwave. You put food in the microwave, you press a button, ding, it's done. We haven't got to that level with resin printing yet. And so the magic button, or I'm feeling lucky, it might work for printing out your items, or it might not. That's why they leave it at, saying, hey, I'm feeling lucky. So let's go back to this, and let's go ahead and we'll just do light supports, leave everything on, and just put I'm feeling lucky, and we'll cross our fingers and see what happens. So it'll analyze, it'll add supports that they think is the best. It'll optimize, it'll do cross bracing, and boom, it puts the little raft in there, and that's what we end up having. Of course, obviously, we would have to move this dude out of the way. So we will. But that is our print. And so it's all supported with the bracings and everything. Now, some people have had some good results with this, but it's not 100% guaranteed. And again, these items, these models are not supported. So you're going to have to add your own supports. So if this seems a little bit daunting, which it might be, it was to me, that you can get and find pre-supported files so you don't have to do all this. So for example, with this alien creature guy here, it ended up that he was a pre-supported file. It drugged this into it, and it already had the supports, and I was like, okay, well, that looks good to me. Sliced it, uploaded it to my printer, and next thing you know, boom, out came the alien xenomorph, which turned out really well. So anyway, yeah, you can do that with the magic button. Does it work? Sometimes it does. With smaller things, I found that it works really well, like the 32 millimeters. With larger prints, you're going to need some larger supports in different areas, and that'll be another video. So if we go up to the top, we notice that we're on the layout phase or feature of this slicer program. If we go to prepare, and we've got a number of different things here, and we notice that on the models, we've got these checkerboarded yellow and orange spots. And those are overhang areas. Those are areas where they're going to need supports. So this is kind of an important thing to, now if I can get this, there we go, a little bit more manageable. You're going to need supports because this just can't print out of thin air. And so that's why you need the supports. It'd be nice, but yeah. And really, in all honesty, you have supports on this left side, raft, hollow, visibility, so you can see where the supports are, or just the lines or indicators, because it can get pretty crowded. And to be honest with you, I would do the raft first. I wish Lychee would put raft before support, because here what you can end up doing is, again, that little raft is going to secure onto your build plate, and then your supports are going to go from there to your model, and that will hold the model and give you a successful print. What I found with this type of raft that has like a little plate with a little lip on it, which is nice, so that way you can get your scraper tool underneath and pry the model off of the build plate, because it's going to stick there. It's going to have some force. But it's either this one, which I don't really like because it seems to use a lot more resin, than something like this one here, which is the line triangle. And so if we end up putting some supports, we'll just click on some stuff here and do this. You can see that it'll put line supports, and so you don't use as much resin. Honestly, for smaller figures, I would use this feature here of the line triangle and the shape wall if I was going to use that. It would probably be for larger prints, but I haven't done a lot of larger prints. So I'm pretty much stuck on in using line triangle. You have some other raft options, but again, I just don't see the benefit of some of these things because you're still going to have to scrape it off. But again, save a little bit of resin, and you can put some. Again, you're saving that little bit of resin there in taking this off of the build plate, especially with smaller figures like this. That it just seems to work out a lot better. So that's usually what I use on these. So then I would go to supports. So we notice we clicked on some things. We're going to go ahead and we'll get rid of some of these and basically do a quick little overview. On the right hand side, we have globals. You can choose your tips. The different dimensions of your supports are set here for the base, the tips, the whole 9 yards. But they have some basic settings. So we have light, and you can see the tip diameter, tip length, and the diameter of the post. You have medium and heavy, and then you can also create your own and have those saved. If you have, really get into this and you change the tip diameter to say for light and you don't like the 0.3 millimeter, you can change that down to 0.2 or 0.15. It's just all kinds of craziness that you could change. I haven't created my own, and basically I just use the stock settings on the Lychee program. So anyway, yeah, you have those different options. And down here, you have auto supports. You have support projection. You could do manual support. So if I end up doing this and I pick light supports, I can end up, we can see, boom, we've got some supports. And, those would obviously be on the areas that would need supports. So you just can't have stuff, hanging in midair. And, you could just do a number of supports or whatever you want to do. So, yeah, you can do this manual. You have the classic mode, or if you hit the space bar, then you can do some other interesting stuff and, change some of the variables, move some of these things and really get into some detailed placement of these. But that's just by hitting the space bar. So we're going to get out of that, remove some of these. And then, support painting, inline supports. The other option that you have is islands, so it'll detect islands, and you can have the level of accuracy. If it's on all the way to the right, which we see is real, and then is the most supports that you'll get, and if you go all the way down here to fast, it'll give you the least number of supports that it thinks it needs to print this model. So usually I just kind of keep it at normal. Then you could add supports to all the different islands or the overhangs that we see there. Do we really want to get into this? How much time we got? We've been here for 30 minutes. Okay, we'll add supports. We'll do it. Why not? Now again, this is the software looking and saying, okay, this is what we think is the best placement of supports to get this model to print. Again, it's not 100%. You might need to add or subtract some different, like on the feed here, that's probably not enough. I would add some more there. from my small little experience that I have in doing miniatures. But yeah, it's a real good way to do these inline supports or these island detectors first, and then put the supports, and then you can go back to manual, and then I could go back and say, well, I want to add some, maybe a medium, to this, and you could add your own supports. As you see there. Well, let's just zoom in. So you could add different supports here of different sizes. Those are the medium. What does the heavy look like? Bam, that's heavy. Yeah. So would I use the heavy on a 32 millimeter? Absolutely not. Maybe one medium, maybe two, but realistically, it's pretty much just light supports are good. So yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can do with this. And again, there's a learning curve with everything. It isn't this plug and play microwave type of action that we see on the interwebs. And that's something that a lot of people, they review the printers and, oh, look at this printer. It's the greatest thing since sliced bread. It has automatic this or that. And here's this slicing program. And you just slice it and print it and boom. It's almost as if they kind of skip over the part that there is a learning curve to doing all of this stuff. And especially if you're getting prints or items, models that you want to print that are not pre-supported, yeah, you're going to have to learn some stuff. And it can be a little frustrating because you'll try some stuff, you'll do some automatic supports, it won't print, you'll get frustrated, you go back, you go over it again, then you watch a ton of YouTube videos, and then you learn how to do it through trial and error. But the good thing is there's a lot of smart people on YouTube that will put up videos and share their experiences that will lessen the learning curve. So that's the benefit of social media. Unlike TikTok, which is terrible. Which, oh, by the way, apparently the U.S. government wants to get rid of TikTok and ban it from the United States. Personally, I think that would be a good thing. But anyway, let us continue on. So we have all of these things here, island proximity. That's kind of like a real-time proximity detection. So if some of these supports are too close to the model itself, it could be, melted into the model, which isn't good. So that's kind of worth doing as well. Utilities, you can change that lift distance. So again, if we wanted to change that, we could change the lift distance, but usually, again, like I said, we keep it at 5 and we're good to go. Auto supports, again, this is really interesting. Let's take a look at the projection supports. And what we could end up doing here is we can take a look at our model, which is a cool looking guy. And we can have, okay, let's say we're going to start on the bottom. And notice we have a sphere, a surface crease, and a surface angle. Because there's such detail on the bottom, I'll just go ahead and use the sphere. And what you can end up doing is basically painting, left click and hold, and you can paint the areas that you want supports. So for example, let's kind of do that. And we'll do that. And we'll just kind of, from the bottom up view, maybe a little bit on his nether region. And this isn't exactly how I would do it, but it's just a way to kind of highlight and show you, what this would look like or could look like if you're going to do supports and projections and things like that. So let's say that's enough, and we've done that. We painted everything. We can preview the supports, and now we've noticed that we got some supports, but there are some variables. So we have global, we have border. In other words, you could do the border on and off, which would reduce the amount of supports that are on the borders of your painted areas. Infill, you could change that to, some different settings, so it's concentric. Usually I'll do grid or concentric. They also have random, so you could do that as well. But pretty much, concentric is good, grid is good, it's not bad. And you could change some of the offsets and things. You could change the supports. Let's change them to light. For the interval, let's drop that down to, 1.6 and see what happens. And then it says we're going to add 50 supports. So offset, let's interval, We'll kind of drop that down a little bit. Let's do 1.5. It's going to add about 80 supports. If everything looks good, you could add those supports, and next thing you know, boom, there we have it. So it added all of those supports on that guy, on the areas that we painted. Now that can save you a lot of time and trouble, but we notice here that there's a lot of these supports that are so close together that these could like meld into or weld into each other, so they're just one big solid mass. And that could cause problems when you're trying to remove the supports off of this little item that you're trying to print. So again, while it could save you a lot of time, this might come into play where you're like, okay, well, these are going to melt into each other. So maybe what I want to end up doing is changing the diameter to some of these. And again, it's this learning curve. It's this trial and error. There's a lot of different things you could end up doing. You could take this, click that, and then, kind of move things out by, changing some of the features on this. And again, it's just a lot of things that you could end up doing and changing the orientation of these so maybe they don't touch each other. And again, that's using the spacebar and going into the advanced manual settings. So yeah, there's so much you can do with this. It is absolutely crazy. And even then, you could go back to your island, and you could do an island search, and this will show you, and it is represented all these islands by these little red markers. So we could go through and say, okay, well, we need a support here, so I'm just going to go ahead and we'll put a light support, click, and when the red goes away, that means you've got that island covered. And you will definitely need these supports to do things like this. But the island and the support system here that we have is a great way. See how that turned red? That's probably not what we want. So we'll just get rid of that. And again, it's trial and error. You can add these things to help with, seriously, there we go. And you can get get your model set up and printed so that it won't be a failed print. So again, there's a big learning curve on this, but the island detector, the projection supports is pretty good. Now the interesting thing is if you put a bunch of manual supports on your Mini and then you do the support projection or the auto supports, it won't keep the ones that you just did manually. So for example, we have this guy here. If we go to generate auto supports, it says delete all supports. Current selection has supports. Adding automatic supports will replace the existing ones. So whatever you end up doing, if you're doing auto supports, do that first and then go back and add your manual supports. Otherwise, you're going to lose everything that you just did. And yeah, that's just why it does that. I don't know. I think it would be a good feature to, if you have some supports that you specifically want to do first manually, I think there should be an option for that. But yeah, it's a great little program. So enough of the supports. You can do a bunch of stuff in this. We'll go back up to the top and go to export. And this is where what we'll end up seeing is all of our models. And even though some of them don't have supports, it'll show that there are 13 islands that are not supported. You could go through, again, run the island, add those supports, but you can level this out. You could tell it what printer to go to, the resin that you're going to be using, if you want to use anti-aliasing or contrast blur or sharpen the details or just have it off. Even in the off position, got some really good details on my Saturn III Ultra. And then basically what you can end up doing is slicing to a file. Let's go ahead and we'll slice it. And we'll just do this onto the desktop, and it'll save it as a .goo file. So what the software will do is generate and show you all the different layers and there's going to be 1,956 different layers. And as it's rendering all of this, of course, one of them doesn't have supports, so we might get some interesting little things here. I think that's probably the first one. But what this will end up doing, the software program slices each of those models in 50 micron layers. So as it's upside down and the build plate goes into the vat of resin, and the UV light will light up in those specific areas, and next thing you know, boom, you've got your file, and it just kind of goes up and down and builds layer by layer. Let's go ahead and cancel this for a second, and let's go back to layout. Let's just do the one, because that's going to take a little bit of time. Oh, and then you have the slider bar that you can go through, and you can see layer by layer on where it's going to hit. And you can reverse it, and again, this is going to be done upside down. So basically it'll start off there. That would be, that's layer 7. As we go up in layers, again, the build plate is going up and down the resin, the UV light is shining, it's going up and going down, shining the UV light, doing layer by layer, and boom, that's how you get your figure. So if I wanted to export this, again, we'll put it onto the desktop. Now this should fail to execute, blah, blah, blah. Seriously, really? Export. Of course, now it's having problems. Seriously, really? I have never had this problem. Let's do the prepare. Really? What do we got going on here? Of course, now that I'm trying to do this, it's kind of crazy. Let's kind of just change something and see what that does. And then we go to export. And we'll just leave anti-aliasing off. We'll try doing this. And now it's not working. Seriously. Failed to execute. Okay. Destination. Your computer. Try it again. Okay. Let's go ahead and we'll close this out. Yeah, it's just kind of crazy. And we'll reopen this. And hopefully it'll save the last thing that you did, which is really nice. And what's strange is this is the first error I have ever had on Lychee Slicer Pro. So we're going to go ahead and do the recovery. Yeah, this is crazy because I just printed out 8 of these guys from the very same file. So there we've got our dude, and we've got everything. Let's go to export. We'll slice it up. Try it again. There we go. So it's going through layer by layer, and that's what is going to happen as it's upside down, and the resin is going to be lit up and hardened in those areas that you see in white. So for every 50 micron layer, it will light up on the screen, and as it goes up, it'll go down into the resin, the light will go on, it'll harden it, then it'll go off, and then the build plate will go up, and then it'll go back down and do the next layer until it does, 1,956 layers, and boom, you get your little item. Another interesting thing down here is on the bottom left-hand side, you can see the printer, the resin that you're using, the microns or the accuracy or the detail. And then it also has an estimated printing time of 5 hours, 42 minutes and 53 seconds. And even you can estimate the resin volume. So in other words, how much resin are you going to use to print this model? And most vats for average little guys here. Let me see if we can find this guy. There it is. So that's the file right there. And that would either go wirelessly over the interwebs. and you could send it to your printer, or you could end up putting it on a USB drive. But yeah, down here on your estimate resin volume, it'll go through and it'll estimate how much resin. So in other words, the object is going to take, let's see if we can see there, 5 hours, 42 minutes, 53 seconds. And again, this depends on some of the settings. You will see some variation between what you see on the slicer program and what actually happens on your printer. But down here, it ends up showing 38.01 milliliters for the object, and supports are going to be 7.7, and the total cost of doing this one little miniature is 92 cents. And again, you could go in the resin settings and you could set how much it cost for 1 liter of resin, and it does the math, and so you don't have to. So yeah, that is what we end up having with Lychee Slicer Pro. And of course, I stumble across some type of error, being the very first time I used it that ever had an error. With all of the different prints that I've done, it is absolutely crazy. So yeah, what are the odds of that happening? So this has been a quick overview of Lychee Slicer Pro and just kind of the basics of it to give you an overview. You can import items either through a file selection or drag and drop, which most people know how to do. You can move, you can scale, you can split, you can copy, you can paste. You can do supports with different types of rafts and supporting systems. You have light, medium, and heavy supports, or you can get really nitty-gritty into the details if you're an advanced user, and you can make up your own supports and save those presets for whatever you find works best for you. And again, we could take this to the export section and slice this into the final GOO file, which is specific for Lychee. Other slicing software programs save it in different formats, but it's still recognizable by your printer. So there it is. You could go really deep into this, especially when we get into supporting prints and things like that. It just gets pretty wild on the amount of detail that you can go into this. And we didn't even go into some of the other things here. So for example, let me make myself a little bit smaller here. If we look on this right-hand side, well, we've got the support. We also have hollow features. So I totally forgot about that. So if we go into hollowing, you could hollow this item out, because if we look on the scale here, we notice that everything in white there indicates that the inside of this model is solid. Well, with the 32 millimeter print, it's really, really small. Like, it's about like that big. Here's the guy that's kind of small. You won't need to hollow out the model. But when you get into bigger models and you don't want to use up a ton of resin, what you can end up doing is hollowing this out, and you can put holes in things so that you can save on resin. It will also reduce the weight of the print, so you won't need as many heavy supports to hold it, which is a good thing, because I've had failed prints because the item was too heavy and my supports weren't heavy enough. But hollowing is a thing that you can do. So if we go up here to the hollowing, we go to 3D hollowing, and this is all I've ever used. I haven't used 2D hollowing. And you can do the wall thickness, which is about anywhere from 1.5 to 1 to 2. Generally, I don't know, let's just do 1.5. And the quality, 0 to 4 being the maximum. 4 is going to round out the insides, whereas if you set it to 1, it'll be more blocky on the inside. So everybody recommends putting it on 4, so let's do that. So we did that, and we're going to add an update. The software will run the hollowing out of this print. And you'll see a reason why we don't do this with little 32 millimeter. But as we go down, now we can see that it's hollowed on the inside, which is great. So you could save a little bit of resin. But when you hollow something out, you need to put holes in it so that the resin can drain out. Because if you do the hollowing and you don't have any drain holes, you're going to trap liquid resin inside of that model. and you're going to cure it, and after a little while, the resin on the inside, it will explode. Yeah, it won't be like a huge fireball or anything, but if you don't have any drain holes, it will ruin your prints. Now, on a 32 millimeter print, it's definitely not something that you need. I've never done it for small prints like this, but let's say if this was scaled up and it's like, 9, 10 inches tall, you would definitely want to hollow it out. So with that said, we go over to holes. You can set a cylinder or a square or a cube. You can set the diameter, as we can see here, it's kind of a big diameter hole. Let's just take this down to, I don't know, let's just take it 5, and then the depth of the hole itself. So what we can end up doing, and let's see if we can zoom in here, and what we can end up doing, it's going to have to do the penetration a little bit more. And what will end up happening is we do a hole, and as you can see there, that's where the hole will be, in his nether regions. So that will allow that resin, like I was saying, if this was a huge model, that would probably be a good place to put the hole because it wouldn't be in a noticeable area. But the hole would be big enough to where you would be able to have that drain hole and get that resin out of there, which would be a good thing because you don't want trapped resin. And, but what about things like these arms and things like this? That's probably not a good thing to have because those areas are just not, they'll just be pockets of resin left over, sealed within that. So what we can end up doing is taking this, and we could do some blockers. I should probably save this for another video, but we just go ahead and on the top right, we'll click blocking, add or edit. You have some different options here. Let's just go ahead and we'll do the square. And what we can do is we can manipulate this to where we can say we just want to get rid of the arm altogether. And we can move this so that way the arm doesn't get any type of, pockets of uncured resin in there, and you just update and boom. So whatever pockets that are there have now been blocked off so that cavity will no longer be there. It's kind of blocked out according to the software. So if we go ahead and exit this, we can end up seeing and see how the arm has gone all solid. Yeah. So, and again, you've got to go through and tweak everything. There's still some other things that we would need to do on this, like with the other arm, the little backpack area and things like that. But that's a good way to isolate certain areas or blocking off certain areas that you don't want hollowed out. And again, it just comes with time and learning. And of course, it depends on the variable, the size of the print that you're doing. So anyway, yeah, that's what we got going on. That is Lychee Slicer Pro, and just kind of an overview. Some people have asked me about this and wanted to do a little bit of review. People have asked me this for quite some time, but I'm so new to resin printing and doing stuff like this that I didn't feel I knew enough to do this justice, but at least I do now. So hopefully within this, oh my gosh, it's an hour, 53 minutes. Hopefully you gain some good information. It's a decent little or decent long overview of Lychee Slicer Pro, and it can even go way deeper than this. But rest assured that there are other programs out there like Chitubox, some other ones that can work with specifically just for resin printers, or you have some that are just for FDM printers. Again, you need to be aware of that as well. But Lychee Slicer, the free version works, and Chitubox has a free version which works. So you can dip your toe into the slicing program from these different companies without having to pay anything. And then, so try before you buy. That is always recommended. But even then, you might run into some problems. So for example, I run Mac, and once you go Mac, you never go back. And I tried the Chitubox free version, and I loved it. And so that brought me to the place that says, well, I'm going to be doing this resin printing thing. This is my new hobby. I'm going to do this stuff. And so I bought the pro version of Chitubox. Well, what happened is then it wasn't working. We had some errors on Cheetah Box Pro. And so I contacted the company. I'm like, hey, this isn't working right with the supports, auto supports and stuff like that. It was giving me some weird things, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it wouldn't. And it wasn't dependent upon the models themselves. It would do it with all different models from all different authors. And it ends up, I was the first one to experience that bug. So basically, I was paying for a program, software, that had a bug in it that I couldn't use, which is weird because the free version worked, but the paid version with all the bells and whistles didn't work as advertised. So they said, hey, well, you're the very first one to have problems with this. We'll give you a refund and so on and so forth. And I was like, okay, that's really cool. And yeah. So I got my refund, and then I ended up going with Lychee, and it seems to be working out really well. So anyway, it's a learning curve. It is a learning curve with these slicing programs, whether it is Resin or FDM, and you're going to have to spend some time and energy getting things dialed in and finding out how they work and how to tweak things. So many times I've seen people that won't do any test prints. They won't dial in their printers. And then they load in this gigantic model, and next thing you know, it failed. And they're like, I don't understand. And then it's like, well, did you dial in your printer? Did you put in the variables? Did you do test prints to find out which is, is it overexposed or underexposed for the resin that you're using for your machine? No, I didn't do that. I just loaded up and it didn't work. Help, that's not how that works. It's not microwave ding, it's ready, capable yet. We're getting pretty darn close. There's resin printers that you have to manually level the printer. Yeah, that's a thing. There are some that have automatic leveling, and so things are getting better and better over time. But again, there's still a learning curve, but it's better than what it used to be. So anyway, in regards to resin printing, this has been Lychee Slicer Pro and an overview of that, which has taken an hour, and I'm sorry I've taken so much of your time. I did this before, and I came up on doing a practice run of this. It was like over 2 hours. So I've really condensed this down. So you got to give me a like for that. Like and subscribe to the channel, because 2.5 hours or so was just, it was a ton of information, but it was way too much. But again, I think this was a justifiable overview of this slicer program. So with that, like, subscribe, appreciate that. And if you have any questions, put it in the comment section down below. As being I am a noob to resin printing, I might not know the answer to your question, but I could probably point you in the right direction to people that do. In other words, Google and YouTube and JD3 Tech is a real good one. Fohammer's got some good information. There's a lot of good YouTubers that I am following in the footsteps of to become proficient at resin printing and slicing and all this neat stuff. So anyway, that's going to be it for today. I am late. I need to get and do my workout today, so we're going to leave it at that. Take care. We'll see you on the next video. Peace. Yeah, almost plug and play.